Successful whitetail hunters share one thing in common. They know that the education routine never stops, and they work year-round to get ready for each season. Based on the understanding of deer conduct and movement, the hunter will plan an approach to be used for his upcoming season. The use of sound techniques and hard work in preparing for the season will give the deer hunter a consistent chance at a successful whitetail hunt. In this episode, we focus on a tale of Trip 8s and their attempt to maintain dominance in the RO360's crew Central Wisconsin food plot. Through our trail cam intel, we'll follow their progress from June through December. But before we focus on the accumulated trail cam data on the 3/8 pointers, first, let's review the background research and work that led to the selection of the core hunting area on this central Wisconsin wooded acreage. Here is a view of our small secondary food plot looking west. Now, how did we select this area to locate our food plot as our core hunting zone? Well, we allowed the land to tell us where we should go. By that, I mean looking at deer sign in the area and to see if the location will address the deer's needs, such as food sources, water sources, sanctuary areas or safe zones, which are also used as bedding sites, and for bucks, an available breeding stock in the area. So let's take a look at a topographical map of what became our food plot and its immediate area. And let's identify one by one the areas that will address the deer's needs. First, you see the red lot lines depicting an area of approximately 20 acres of the 40 acres we hunt. Next, in yellow, you see the location of our base camp trailer in relation to the rest of the area. And next, you'll see the black, that is our ATV trail encircling the approximate 20-acre area. And now that you're familiar with the general layout of this portion of the property, we'll get into the specific areas of the deer's basic needs. The number one deer need is food. And as you can see, there are farmers' fields all around this acreage that we hunt. They usually contain two basic crops, that being corn and beans, which in this area are the deer's main staple food sources. Our food plot is being utilized as a staging secondary food source, and we'll get you more information about that later in this video. The number two need is water. The largest water source is just off the property and is the neighboring farmer's irrigation pond, while a secondary water source is the swamp area. The number three need is a sanctuary or safe zone. The first is the swamp area. We stay out of the main swamp area year-round, giving the deer a safe haven for resting and bedding down. And as you can see from the map, our ATV trail goes around the central core area of the swamp. This area has the most deadfall trees and bedding areas, and we try to keep the intrusion level to 0. A second dense pine grove provides cover and protection during inclement weather, such as snowstorms, heavy rain, or heavy wind, and acts as a protective blanket for the deer to seek refuge. And finally, as you can see, our food plot is centrally located close to the sanctuary areas and secondary water source. Also, it's located away from the ATV trail. This secondary food plot is set up as a staging area for the deer before they move out into the surrounding farmers' fields to feed in the evenings. Our food plot is on a gradual south-facing slope coming out of the sanctuary swamp. This is to take advantage of the sun's warmth in early spring and late fall. To review, our food plot core hunt area was dictated by what the land in this area told us. Food locations, water locations, and safe sanctuary areas led us to our secondary food plot location. In your hunting area, read the surrounding areas of the property. Get to know the travel routes by scouting the deer sign. Find the food sources, the water sources, bedding, and sanctuary areas. Make sure the sanctuary areas stay just that. Give the deer a place they feel comfortable and safe 365 days a year, and it will help make this part of their core area. A whitetail's home range may span several miles, but radio tracking studies show that bucks have a core area of approximately 40 acres where they spend 90% of their time. Now the question becomes, how do you attract and keep bucks in your chosen area and have that become their core area? By the beginning of hunting season, most adult deer have become sedentary and virtually refuse to travel from familiar home ranges. That's why it's important to begin to attract deer in early summer at the latest, to get them to settle into their new territory and become comfortable. But an all year round strategy is best to attract and keep deer. Now, how do we go about attracting bucks to hang out in our 20-acre core hunting area? Like we just talked about, the number one object is to provide to their four main needs in that core hunting area: food, water, sanctuary areas, and of course, does for breeding. An important part of providing for a deer's needs is practicing QDM, which stands for Quality Deer Management. For those of us able to hunt on private land but have smaller acreage, I'm talking 40 acres or less, it is crucial to include your surrounding neighbors in a general deer management plan. For the RO360 crew, we were fortunate enough to have most of the surrounding property owners practice QDM. This puts you all on the same page and have the same basic strategy and all benefit from the results. This central group of neighboring landowners had been practicing these QDM guidelines for at least a decade already. This was of great assistance in establishing an area that attracted deer to use as their home range. We only had to fine-tune the process. And now a little more information on our secondary staging food plot. We have been using a throw and grow seed product that requires no large tilling and packing equipment. I am not pushing anybody's product, as many seed producers supply a no-till throw and grow type product. Buy what's best for you. My only recommendation is that it contains winter hardy clover, ryegrass, and forage rape. We planted one that has radish in it also. So we've taken care of the deer's four basic needs. Now we create illusions to fool the bucks to come into our specific core hunting area on a regular basis. Our number one illusion tactic is to create a mock scrape to challenge the area's dominant or boss buck. The mock scrape is introducing a stranger who has the cojones to make a scrape on his turf. Bucks make scrapes because they are genetically imprinted to do so. They dig all the way to the dirt, then urinate in the scraped area and stomp a footprint in them. The size of the scrape is a reliable indicator of the size and age of the buck that created it. Mature bucks create scrapes that are anywhere from 18 inches to 4 feet in diameter. While a wide variety of strategy and tactics exist on how and where to build mock scrapes, I prefer to build a scrape near my ground blind and always near sanctuary areas, as bucks are more likely to revisit scrapes that are near secure cover areas. I also want an overhanging tree limb or licking branch, and under that branch I'll scrape out a medium-sized scrape, as I'm trying to create the illusion that this buck is beatable. If I make the scrape too large and dominant looking, it might have the opposite effect and chase a more passive or submissive buck away. Then I use buck urine to activate the scrape. I do not set up a dripper, but I saturate a spot in the scrape. I like to make it seem natural, again, creating the illusion. To me, a single drip every now and then does not seem natural. This style does require more maintenance than a drip bottle, but when the buck comes in to check out the scrape, it has to seem more natural to him. Now you could add some interdigital gland scent to help the scrape be more believable. Again, creating the illusion. That scent would be left as the deer creates the scrape with its hoofs. The interdigital gland is located between a deer's hoofs. It secretes a waxy substance that is left as the deer walks. It communicates deer info such as sex and age to other deer. You should make sure that the scent you are marking with is from a mature male deer. Again, create the correct illusion. The licking branch, the low-hanging limb above the mock scrape. A buck will twist and rub the overhanging limb in his mouth and chews on the edges, leaving the branch looking frayed and broken. He deposits his saliva and forehead gland scent on the branch, which is another calling card to other bucks, saying, "Hey, this is my breeding area." If a licking branch gets chewed up so bad, I'll still keep using that productive scrape. I'll find the same style tree and cut off a replacement branch, and using zip ties, I'll tie it back on to what's left of the original licking branch, making sure it hangs low enough so the deer can reach it. Then I'll spray a scent remover for the zip ties and where I handled that branch. And then it's good to go. Because of the quality deer management program being followed in this area, there is a well-established doe herd in this home range. But to make sure we attract bucks into our food plot and core hunting area, we put down estrus doe urine in our food plot core area. Again, creating the illusion for the bucks. So starting a little early in the rut cycle, we start getting the girls' attractant scent on the ground. Generally in Wisconsin, it's October through December is peak breeding time. Making sure that the bucks in the area know that our food plot was the place to be to find the girls. Now, around the same time we start putting down the estrus doe urine in the area, we add a new buck scent in the mock scrape. Not the same scented buck urine we've been putting down, but a different product buck urine. After all, what's going to fire up a buck? The thought of a new dude crashing their dance party will just be too much. The buck should start showing up on a regular basis to challenge the new guy.
I don't like to push any products, so I'm going to show you the back of this one. But this is a estrus scent from 3 different does. And what's unique about this, and the reason I like this, it's not a liquid product and it's drippy and messy. If you look at this, it's kind of like a roll-on stick deodorant, as you can see here. So what I've got now in our food plot area, we've got some really low-cut stumps that we haven't been able to get out of the ground here, and you've heard the story about the conditions of the swamp with the water and mud and getting stuck. So I'm going to utilize those by rubbing this scent on those, and then up a little bit on some trees to get that scent in the air tonight. Hi, well, we just walked you through the how, where, and why of our core hunting strategy and setups. Now, I'm not saying that if you follow exactly what we showed you that you're going to come out with the same results that you're about to see. But there are very many different conditions and variables in the various hunting areas that you guys may be hunting as opposed to where we hunt. So hopefully we've given you some ideas and strategies that you can pick and apply in your area and hopefully increase the success on your next whitetail hunt. And now it's finally time to see how this strategy and planning and effort all came together for us. So let's follow along from late May through December, and let's see the tale of Trip 8s. Enjoy.
We had the first licking branch activity on 5/6, and later that day many deer looking for feed growth in our plot. Our first confirmed trail cam buck came on 5/17, and so did more licking branch activity.
Well, there were over 3,000 videos and pictures that were taken from May through December on 5 trail cams that were in the vicinity of the food plot or on the food plot itself. Of those, I found 843 pictures of just bucks. So I've whittled them down to some highlights, and that's what you're about to see. So sit back, enjoy, and watch the growth of the bucks in the area, specifically the 3 8-pointers that come to dominate our food plot area.
And it didn't take long for the serious action to start. We had a nice sized buck with an early antler growth of a 4-point move in and mark his territory. In fact, he marked it twice. Then we had another buck come in just about an hour later to check out the scrape and the licking branch. The original buck returned to his marked scrape and licking branch within minutes, and we had our first confrontation. The newer buck moved off, and our velvet early 4-point antler buck remarked his licking branch and scrape. And just when he thought the confrontation was over, the other buck came right back. Finally, the smaller buck moved off, but the 4-point wouldn't move until that other deer was out of sight. Almost an hour later, that smaller buck came back and marked his territory. Then he came back around 5 hours later at 1:30 in the morning to recheck the scent. The following morning, a button buck showed up to check out the scrape and the licking branch. About an hour later, our early velvet 4-point showed up again and remarked his scent. Later that evening, the spiked buck from yesterday's confrontation showed up and marked the area with his scent. About 20 minutes later, our early velvet 4-point showed up and was checking out the area. The spiked buck moved in, and just like that, there's another confrontation brewing. The 4-point surveyed the area and was moving out when, guess what? The spiked buck moved in on the scrape. That didn't last, as the 4-point chased him off again. The 4-point then remarked his territory again, but this time he hung around longer before finally moving off. These two bucks are not getting along well. And I'm not sure what buck came in at dark, but he was busy working over that licking branch. A few days later, our early velvet 4-point showed up early morning to remark his licking branch and scrape. Within 15 minutes, the small spike buck returned and was checking and marking the area. Then later that evening, the early velvet 4-point showed up. He began chasing the other bucks in the area away from his scrape and licking branch. Then the next afternoon, the 4-point showed up again, checking and remarking his scrape and licking branch, and stuck around watching for a while. On 5/29, we had the 4-point show up with a subordinate buck trailing him. The 4-point makes sure that the other buck moved off before he started to remark the area. And as you can see, we still had plenty deer coming into the food plot on a consistent basis looking for early food growth. The month finished out with a night excursion by that spike buck that was having run-in issues with the early velvet 4-point. June started with this small spike buck showing up to check things out and leave his scents in the early afternoon of the 2nd. Then later that evening, what I thought was our early velvet 4-point showed up and put his mark down on the scrape and licking branch. But looking closely, this rack was different, and I believe this is a brand new 4-point buck that showed up. Then at 3:44 in the morning, another 4-point buck showed up. I think this was another different 4-point buck, but it's harder to tell at night. Finally, our 4-point early velvet buck returned at early daylight to check out and remark his scrape and licking branch. Then the spike buck made a brief appearance at the scrape at midday and moved on. On mid-morning of the 4th, our trail cams captured the first fawn of 2019 trailing its mom in the food plot. By noon on the same day, we had a doe checking scent on the licking branch. Does will sometimes check scrapes and licking branches to analyze the scents left by the bucks in order to evaluate the health and virility of the buck to determine if it would be a worthy mate. A positive ID on our early velvet 4-point buck showed him back at the scrape, remarking his scent and moving off. 48 hours later, on the evening of the 8th, a spike buck moved into the scrape area and was chasing all of the deer away. And around 11 p.m. on the same day, our early velvet 4-point buck came back and began a process of annihilation of the licking branch and moved away and took a short break. Then he began round 2 on the licking branch. Finally, all that was left was one small, thin, frayed branch. I guess he was bound and determined to show all the bucks in the area that he was the boss. 24 hours later, it looks like the doe came back to check out the licking branch. I'm guessing she's thinking, I found the buck for me. Later that evening, the smaller 4-point buck shows up at the scrape, leaves his mark, and moves off. About a half hour later, our doe, who's interested in Mr. Right, shows up at the licking branch and is getting mixed signal scents. She returns at dark only to find the same mixed scent pattern. The doe returns almost 30 hours later to check scent again. Still confused by the scent mixture, she just stares at the branch, and she's thinking, man, I had it all figured out. Now what? Early the next morning, it looks like there's a new guy on the block. Or is it one of the early velvet 4-points with a little more rack growth? He comes in for a scent check of the area. My guess is he's picking up the doe's urine scent, as he never marks the scrape and moves on, which seems odd. Now, no action occurs on the trail cams in the scrape area for almost 18 hours when this spike buck checks out the scrape. He returns about 7 hours later in daylight to recheck the area. Around midnight, our early velvet 4-point returns to the scene of the crime and remarks what's left of the damaged licking branch and scrape. Later that morning, another 4-point early growth buck shows up. Then the spike buck comes by later to remark the spot. A couple of minutes later, That small 4-point early growth buck wanders through but does not stop at the scrape. Around 7:30 a.m., an early growth 6-point shows up, moves into the scrape and marks his territory, takes a walk around the food plot and returns to the scrape where a doe meets up with him. I'm wondering if this is the same doe that was checking scent at this spot. Then, this wide rack 6-point shows up briefly on the trail cam, his first appearance, and moves off camera. This smaller spike buck returns, and just like that, the wide rack 6 shows up on the trail cam again, moving the smaller buck off and then showing some interest in the other scrape area. And then it looks like 3 bucks are leaving the food plot for points north. About an hour later, this new bruiser walks in and makes his first appearance on the trail cam. Looks like at least a 10-point in the making. And finally, later that night, what I assume is the doe that's been checking out the scrape comes through twice to check scent. On the evening of the 17th, the persistent small spike buck showed up again to mark the scrape. He returns 2 hours later to check the licking branch, and again returns around 9 p.m. to mark the licking branch. The doe that's been checking the scrape area for scent shows up at 10:45 and takes a good scent check of the licking branch, then returns 3 days later to scent check it again. Mid-morning of the 22nd, the small 4-point buck returns to mark the scrape and scent check the area for what I believe they're smelling for, doe urine. Later that evening, a new spike buck shows up, or possibly a previous spike buck with more antler growth. The changes in growth on the racks and trying to follow all these bucks is getting tougher to do. On the morning of the 23rd, we have a doe returning with her fawn to feed. And later that evening, the newer spike buck returns to finally put his scent mark on the licking branch. Around noon on the 24th, a large V-rack style 6-point buck shows up. Again, with all the bucks and the continued antler growth, it's getting harder to follow these bucks as they grow. Not sure if this guy was in here when his rack was smaller or if this is his first appearance. Anyways, he moves around the food plot doing scent checks on the ground and a little feeding, but does not leave his mark at the scrape. 2 days later, our persistent spike buck shows up again, but all he manages to do is chase the does off. I think he needs a little more growth and maturity yet. Early the next morning, our 6-point shows up to investigate the scrape area, but does not hang around for long. Mid-morning of the next day shows a new doe with 2 fawns in the food plot. And later in the evening, on the 30th, our persistent spike buck makes a quick pass through the area.
Now you've heard about all the type of deer activity and quantity of deer in May and June. In July and August, the growth rate on the body size and the antler growth rate explode. The bucks are maturing, they're starting to show interest in the does, and the big boys are coming out to play. So, I'm not going to clutter the background with my commentary. I'm going to let you sit down, watch, and soak in the bucks of summer on the RO360's Central Wisconsin food plot. Enjoy.
As September rolls around, declining daylight to increasing darkness starts taking place, and the deer are acutely aware of the changing daylight patterns. And as such, their patterns, which have been consistent the last couple of months, also start changing. It doesn't matter if you've kept them content and safe with their four basic needs: food, water, sanctuary, and available does on your land. They will start to change their feeding patterns to a dawn to dusk schedule when human pressure is less, because as time went on, survival tactics changed their fall behavior. They learned that when daylight hours grow shorter, their chances of survival are much greater if they cut down on daylight movement. They may also alter movement patterns. In general, you can expect to see less deer daylight movement than during the summer months. But if you've done your work to build a good foundation to provide for their four basic needs in your core hunting area, even though the movement will be less frequent, you should still see quality deer at their four basic need areas on your property. Now it's just a matter of timing, like almost everything else, being at the right spot at the right time. You've got the spot down to the basic need locations and illusion locations you've created, and you've put the percentages in your favor. Now let's take a look at the bucks of fall from September through December on the RO360's Central Wisconsin core hunting area. As you can see, through September and mid-October, the buck still presents some daylight opportunities, albeit more and more only early mornings and late afternoons. But there are still plenty of quality deer still showing themselves on our trail cameras. Our best bow harvest opportunities are from opening day of bow season in September through mid-October. starting in mid-October, the majority of the buck movement is nocturnal, but there are still some daylight targets that present themselves. If you don't think that the buck testosterone is flowing by late October, check this out. In 4 days, there are 6 separate assaults on the same licking branch over the mock scrape. Who says the bucks don't get fired up before November in Wisconsin?
Well, that ends the tale of trip 8s. But you can see how our mock scrape, licking branch, food plot, water sources, and sanctuary areas all came together to procure and hold quality deer all year round. A quality deer management program can also work for you. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch my videos on my channel. A big thank you for that. Now feel free to comment below, or if you don't want your comments available in the public eye, we can also be reached at rapintoutdoors360@gmail.com. And if you know a friend you think may enjoy this video series, please feel free to share this with him or share our link. And always, whether you fish or hunt, make sure you practice CCR. Catch, conserve, replenish. Make sure that that resource is available for future generations. We'll see you all next time.